Hello and good evening. Good evening, dear friends and guests of Democracy 2021. I'm very proud to have the honor to introduce to you and to announce to you a person who is very dear to us at das Progressive Zentrum and especially at the Future of Democracy program, and who is also, so to say, the founder of Democracy, the Conference on Democratic Transformation. Please welcome with me Hanno Burmester, who will give to you a keynote titled A Deeper Democracy, Democratizing Ourselves. Enjoy.
Thank you very much. A week ago, I traveled through time, quite an amazing experience. I was part of an experimental setting here in Berlin at the Emerge gathering, which happened, I think, last Friday and Saturday. And this experiment's question was, how would we, as humans from 2021, describe the times we live in to our descendants, 7 generations from now? And we also looked at how would these descendants around 180 years from now talk to us. Which questions would they ask if they had the opportunity to talk with us? And I was happy. I served as representative of the future. And from my 2,200 perspective, which was quite crazy, I obviously urged my ancestors to be more radical, more bold in their approach and in tackling the climate crisis and the environmental crisis we face, and to more openly enter the great transformation we're in. And to my surprise, and this was the intense experience in that experiment, my words were not so much fueled by anger or impatience, but rather by a very warm feeling of empathy and compassion. Looking at these people from 2021, I realized, okay, these guys, these humans, they faced the challenge to fundamentally undo the world they had built in the decades before. And they had to rewrite many of the very fundamental ground rules their economy and their political system were based on. And what I understood when I had this perspective was that these people not only had to undo their system, to reconfigure it, they also had to develop a very different quality of relating to themselves, of relating to other humans, of relating to other species, and of relating to the planet as a whole. In other words, in the 21st century, at least it appeared to me that way, humans had given up the mistaken notion that they were superior to other life on Earth. And in that moment, the great transformation of the 21st century showed itself as something that was far bigger than just a mere realization of political reforms. To me, as future citizens, it presented itself as a very collective shift towards a new paradigm, maybe even more fundamental than the so-called Enlightenment from early modern times. So the 21st century changed how humans saw the world and how they saw themselves in it. Now, obviously, I cannot know how humans will look back on us 180 years from now. But it might be that if things go well, the history books of the 22nd and 23rd centuries will describe the 21st century as an era of fundamental reconciliation, an era when human society reintegrated itself within the boundaries of the ecosystem, an era when, for the first time since the beginnings of modernity, humanity successfully balanced its immediate needs with those of non-human life and those of future generations. And looking from this perspective, I believe that democracy has a very historic moment to seize. In the coming years, it can become a driving force in reconciling over our society with the overall needs of humanity and non-human life. And just to remind you, we have around 8.8 million species on this planet, and humanity is only one of them. So for the first time in the history of modern democracy, We could create a balance between short-term interests and long-term needs, between nations and human civilizations, between human and non-human life, between the born and the unborn. Grand words, I know. But I do indeed believe that ultimately this is really what is at stake. When we discuss the ecological and social transformation we are currently facing, we discuss the fundamental rebalancing of short-term material and long-term systemic interest. That's a shift not only in structure, but also in culture and worldview, how we see us as human beings, how we see our context, and how we relate to us and this context. So that's the perspective. I hope humans from 2200 will have history books like that. But let's take a look back and look at the fundament we're going to build this shift on. So over the past decades, and I think you all know that, democracy has done a very good job at focusing on the individual, at facilitating individual liberty and well-being. Mostly material well-being, but still. And to us today, I think that's one of the reasons why we're all here tonight, it becomes increasingly clear that democracy must transcend this focus, that this is worthy, but it's not enough. It's actually self-destructive. So what our time asks for is for us to give equal value to the collective and to the systemic perspective. We must ensure that long-term well-being is granted not only for individuals, but also for mankind as a whole and for the life on Earth. So the question we face is this, and the question democracy faces is this: how can democratic societies foster a culture of liberty that does not systematically violate the greater whole? And what would a democracy look like that understands itself as part of the ecosystem, not external or superior to it? This is what we must urgently find out and decisively realize. Now, this is very abstract, I know. It's very big, somehow scary, I know. So let's ask, what does all this mean for society and politics in the coming years? And I believe if we look from the future perspective, we can see three strategic imperatives for 21st century democracy. The first imperative is that democratic societies must enable and catalyze the integration of society within the boundaries of the ecosystem. I said that already. I think the question how we do this will bring with it very intense political battles. I think we have no idea how tough it's going to get. But I believe the fact that this reintegration is needed is non-negotiable, and it's not going to be up for debate. The second imperative is that democracy must establish a different set of ground rules and structures. We must enable society to thrive, not primarily in the short term, but really in the long term. We must govern from a long-term perspective that integrates the interest of future generations while respecting the needs of citizens today. A balancing act. Conflicting interest, you would say. And I think this will bring with it considerable tension with some of the core principles of democracy. After all, if we establish a sustainable governance that is focused on a long-term perspective, we must still gain democratic majorities for this political trajectory, and that's not an easy thing. Which brings me to the third imperative, which I think is not being talked about enough. One of the central challenges for democracy today, I believe, lies in systematically catalyzing, incentivizing, and cultivating a collective consciousness that respects, honors, and legitimizes a systemic and long-term approach to politics. So the task is to catalyze a political culture, a collective mindset, that includes the well-being of other citizens, of other humans, of other living beings into our everyday thinking and acting. So far, so good. But what does this mean for the political agenda of the coming years? Firstly, I believe we must ensure that the principles and structures of democratic societies are systematically geared towards long-term systemic well-being. We must alter many of the fundamental logics of how we organize politics and government, as well as the market, which can all be done with radical reform, the standard political process. And I believe the good news is that the means for doing that already exist. Over the past years, around the globe, many viable transformative ideas have been created, ideas that will help readjusting democracy and the markets towards a more systemic long-term perspective. And I'm proud to say that many of these people who came up with these ideas were here at Democracy over the past years. Just to name a couple of these ideas so that you know that this is not abstract talk, but there are actually very specific ideas out there. We can talk about the reconfiguration of the GDP. We can talk about the strategic implementation of models like the donut economy model. We can talk about implementing future councils and citizens' assemblies, as is being talked about in Germany right now. All of this can be done. The ideas are there. So we have viable pathways for restructuring democratic governance. Maybe not enough of them. Maybe it's not solidified enough. And maybe it's not tested enough, yes. But there is a very solid fundament we can build on. So what we need now, and I think this is really crucial for every one of us in this room, are democratic leaders who organize parliamentary majorities for those ideas, for realizing them, and to establish them as part of the permanent democratic architecture. But then there's a second task, and I think this is harder, because there's less awareness for it, and there are less ideas ready for realization. And I would call this task the inner dimension of societal transformation. And the question that leads us here is, how can we systematically incentivize a democratic mindset that accepts and embraces a wider systemic perspective? So I do not only think myself, but also the others in my context, and those I can see and not see, those I can feel and not feel. And that, of course, is a crucial question, right? So for the majority of voters to accept and legitimize a kind of politics that is geared towards systemic well-being, we need citizens who buy into the assumptions that lie behind this political approach. So this is really a question about, where is the political power? Where is the political majority? So only if this is the case will politics be able to actually take into consideration and respect the well-being of people who are not voters, the well-being of life that is not people, and the planetary fundament that nourishes and sustains us all. So in many ways, this describes a process of deepening democracy, and this is where I come to the title of this conference. In modern history, democratization always meant including voices into the democratic discourse and into democratic decision-making that had not been heard and included before. And the challenge we face now lies in including perspectives into the democratic discourse that cannot be easily represented into national parliaments. Interests of humans from other ends of the world, or the interests of species that are not human. Now, the ideas how we could do that, they already exist. We have them. What we don't have is the mindset that enables us to realize these ideas, to implement them on basis of a majority of the voters and in parliaments. So what I'm saying is that we lack the awareness in the political sector that the cultivation of a deepened democratic mindset is really a task of vital importance and needs a lot of investment and attention over the coming years. So this is one thing that's really complicated, and I want to add to the complication because, compared to reforming institutions and changing structures, changing consciousness obviously is a lot more non-linear, it's less tangible, and it's radically decentral because it involves every single citizen within society. So the evolution of our democratic mindset can neither be planned nor can it be executed as a standard political process. It's a development that is super decentral, super messy, and it requires individual reflection and growth. So we are far beyond the usual scope of where, you know, politics sees its actions. And yet, I do believe that there are things that can be done politically and systematically to foster the inner development of society. If we take the insights from adult development psychology seriously, the task we face is to systematically provide impulses for, and not just towards, the inner development of our citizens, of ourselves. And be aware, by saying that, I do not mean lifelong learning. Lifelong learning is super nice, we need that as well. But I really speak about addressing the human ability to change how we see the world and how we relate to this world. So I speak about changing consciousness. And this is not an esoteric term, you know, that's a psychological concept. It's about the fundamental paradigms we encounter the world with and how we see us in this world. And we know that this can be done. We all have evolved our consciousness within the span of our lifetime, everyone in this room. And we know from research that you know, we can create environments where people more readily and more quickly develop as human beings. We have the capacity to grow, and we all can develop the capability to handle higher complexity, to develop our relational awareness, to change and shift in how we feel and act upon empathy, and so on. And we do know that there are certain environments that help humans to evolve in such a way. Put very simple, to develop, people need spaces where they can safely go beyond the boundaries of their inner comfort zones. So we need to create safe spaces, spaces where people get the opportunity to reflect themselves, their context, and their position within that context, which creates new perspectives on ourselves and the world we live in. Now, to some of you, this may ring a bell. You may remember that Thomas Björkman at Democracy, I think 2 years ago, he spoke about an example from Sweden. He told us how around 150 years ago, Sweden, the Swedish state, opened up state-funded centers for adult development, open for all members of society as a free offer. These spaces were basically what I just described. People could reflect themselves, could learn, could be in dialogue with each other, and change perspective. And as it turned out, these centers were a major booster for the rapid development of Scandinavian societies in the late 19th and early 20th centuries. So the development of individuals helped society to evolve towards a new level of development. And that's a historical example, I know, but it shows that it's possible to systematically provide spaces for inner development. And I wonder if 19th and 20th century Scandinavians could do it, why shouldn't we be able to do that today? Now, if you think, okay, this is all nice, but it's also quite fluffy, I ask you to reconsider. What I learned over the past 15 years on the political playfield is this. I believe we do not lack information regarding the situation we're in. Neither do we lack ideas that help us tackle the challenges of our times. And we also do not lack the economical means to realize these ideas. All of that is there in abundance. What we lack is both the individual and collective consciousness that helps us realize a different kind of politics. I think we're guided by misleading assumptions and outdated values. So it turns out that our inner worlds are really the blind spot that help us that limit our capacity to effectively respond to the meta-crisis we face. Which also means that only if we change these inner worlds will we be able to successfully reconfigure the human-made world we have built over the past decades. This, I believe, is why we should invest more to catalyze the inner development of democratic societies. The expansion of our inner capacity to transform deserves as much attention as the reform of our external systems and structures. Now, if you want to know more, about this weird paradox, we know everything, but we don't act. You can check out my new book. This is my short advertisement section here. It's called Unlearn. It was released 2 months ago. It's called A Compass for Radical Transformation, and goes exactly into this spot. You know, why do we not act, and what does it need for us to really change our patterns of perceiving, of thinking, and of acting in different ways? And I realized that what I just shared with you is unfinished. It's an open inquiry. There are no ready answers. I cannot present you with a solution which, you know, you can take and implement, which may be disappointed. At the same time, as some of you may know, one of my intentions when we started the Democracy Conference was to gain attention for the inner dimension of democratic transformation, just because there's not enough focus on that. And arguing for this perspective and translating it into the political playfield is something we're just beginning to do. Not only us, I think this is also the case internationally. And I know that it will stay with me over the years to come. It's unfinished business. And at the same time, and please allow me these last words, today is my last day as Policy Fellow and thus also as co-host of this conference. And even though there's a lot of unfinished business and a lot of open questions, I tremendously value the journey we had together and these red threads we started to weave and crystallize. And this network we opened up here, in which I very tangibly experienced again yesterday and today, enabled me to meet many allies from countries all over the world, which really strengthened, I think, not only myself, but also the motivation of all these people we connected here. And some of them turned friends, which is great. Many people who are really at the forefront of a deepened democratic practice and democratic reform. And I'm very grateful for all this, for the encounters I was blessed with. So I want to say thank you. And this thank you also goes to my colleagues at this Progressive Zentrum. Many of you became friends over the past years, and we shared many great experiences. I think this is the wrong place to talk about that. But I want to say that I treasured these moments, and I'm happy about the long time we worked together, especially because I know that my perspective and my interests very often expanded and sometimes transgressed the circle of interest this think tank usually is dealing with. So, on a closing note, I must admit that I experienced a growing schism over the past years. On the one hand, there is, and I think we all know this, an intensifying, quite pressing need for decisive and radical political reform, and at the same time, this need was met by political institutions and by lawmakers who all too often did their best to ignore or deny or delay meaningful reform. And I hope that the situation will change and that the established political space cultivates more honest curiosity for new perspectives, for new ideas, for different kinds of people. I am very sure that it will benefit from them. And I am sure that our ways will continue to cross, and I'm looking forward to everything that is to come. Thank you very much.